my breath away. I am so glad I get to live this life. And not a lot of people get a chance to live with that much joy and that much pleasure, because it takes a lot of courage. And yet the profoundness. And so what we're up to today in this conversation is to really start to look at what makes that kind of fulfillment, that kind of joy, that kind of love, that kind of success possible. And I'll take a couple of minutes just to share a little bit about who I am and why I'm talking about this topic with such a diversity of things that Anthony mentioned as he introduced me. If you go back in history, I grew up in the heart of the women's movement in the 70s, in the beginning of the divorce movement. And I had a whole lot of conditioning about what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be successful, and how to protect myself so I never got hurt. But that protection thing got to be a problem eventually. Didn't take long to be a problem. But growing up that way, and the expectations of who I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to do, what I couldn't do, what would be weak, what would be passive, what would be successful and safe. But putting all those things together got really interesting. And so my journey with love started there too, because I used to walk around with a little pink t-shirt that had a puppy dog on the front that said, "If I follow you home, will you keep me?" And there was this place where I was so committed to being loved that I would abandon myself in the process. And it started young. What do I have to do to make sure that everybody loves me, everybody likes me, everybody wants me around? And it doesn't matter what happens in here while I do that. And we might call it desperate, and it started young, but that energy impacts every area of life, from how it impacted how I showed up in classrooms. Got an electrical engineering degree at Michigan, and I wouldn't go see a professor to ask a question because it meant that I might look stupid. It meant that I might not know something. It meant that I might not be respected. It meant that I might not be liked, and that would be heartbreaking. But I would suffer and struggle to make sure, in my own little world, not asking those questions, to ensure that I was trying to get loved. But it never worked. It didn't work. And then thought, my parents got divorced early on, and I had a whole lot of judgments about what men were like. And I'm going to use the ends of the gender spectrum right now. It plays across no matter where we sit on that gender spectrum. But right now I'm going to use the ends of that spectrum and all of my judgments about men and how they showed up and what they did. And there was one aspect that was admired. That was the whole women's movement. Okay, this is how you be successful. But there was another aspect that, going through the experiences that I did in relationships, that I said, well, I don't trust them either. And not only do I not trust them because they're successful, I'm going to prove that I'm better. So I walked around as I got my engineering degree, and I went to work in Houston, Texas in the 90s in the oil and gas industry and high tech. And I'm going to outman the men. I'm going to perform and prove that I am better. You could argue whether that was successful or not, but I got promoted a lot. And yet I was miserable, absolutely miserable. I'd get fed by those accolades and the promotions and the increased salary, and yet inside I was dying. And that my marriage fell apart quite quickly. And one day I found myself in an event, actually the week of 9/11. I was at an event in Hawaii with Tony Robbins, and we couldn't go home. You couldn't drive home from Hawaii, and you weren't going to get on a boat. So we stayed. And that week changed my life. That week, I got introduced to emotional consciousness in an entirely new way. I got introduced to our reactivities and our responses, and how do we stay present to those in the depths of the most trying times. And I got introduced to the concepts of masculine and feminine, which is the heart of this conversation and this talk today. And started to understand these masculine feminine dynamics that exist within every single one of us as human beings. Doesn't matter what our gender is, doesn't matter what our orientation is, doesn't matter what we're attracted to or what turns us on. We all have masculine and feminine energy. And the relationship of those two energies within us and between us has massive impact on our success, our prosperity, our happiness, our energy, our attractive qualities. And a lot of times we think of attraction as romantic, but client attraction is just as important as any romantic attraction. And although the dynamics are slightly different, there's a lot of similarities. So we'll explore that today too. And so that wake-up call to, oh my God, the understanding of these two energies explains why I am successful and why I am miserable, why I cry myself to sleep at night, why I am exhausted. And so I walked out of that event when we could finally fly home. And I knew that I would leave corporate. And I knew that my commitment was to help women so they never went through the pain that I went through again, and to help men so that they never went through the pain that I put men through. Because being, my apologies, I had that on driving, being the way that I was, I couldn't have a conscious relationship with the masculine in a place of trust, in a place of true respect. There was too much competition and there was too much fear. And so it only took about 1.5 years for things to align. And I left corporate in 2003, 20 years ago, to step onto this path. And I have studied everything from masculine, feminine dynamics to conscious leadership to tantra to all of the ways that we relate in love. And so that fierce commitment for love, for happiness, for success has brought me here. And it is my honor to share this with you. So let's dive in a bit. And if we look at, let's talk about in business, the experience that we have, like, let's say if we're in business, on some level, we want that business, whether it's our own business or whether we're in someone else's business, but results is an aspect of that business. But the experience that goes with the results is also critical. And one of the things that's so interesting when we talk about masculine and feminine dynamics is that for the most part, business has been modeled on masculine energy. And I'll define masculine and feminine in a second. But business has been a masculine model. And as 50, 60, 70 years ago, as women were coming into that in more depth, in droves and coming in greater numbers, and we've continued to do that, this argument, almost this fight between masculine and feminine energy, and they're seeing more and more and more studies of, and I'm going to use, this is where I'm going to separate male and female and masculine and feminine. I'll say more about that in a moment. But the studies tend to look at women in leadership, men in leadership, what happens at our highest levels and what happens to those companies. And they're seeing more and more that the impact of having women in those leadership positions has a direct effect on the bottom line and the success of teams. There was a Harvard Business Review study that looked at the success of a team went up and up and up with the number of women on the team until the point where it was all women and then it dropped again. So this dynamic of the two energies together having the most impact. And we can talk about that in terms of team, and we can talk about that within what's happening within us and how do we integrate both of those energies within ourselves. And so there's an idea of how these energies go together, but let's talk about the energies. masculine energy is the energy of get shit done, make it happen. There's a result, there's a goal, drive towards it. It's assertive, it's directive, it's decisive, it is very focused, quite linear, and it has an energy that's moving forward. Does that make sense, you guys? Okay. In contrast, feminine energy is the energy that is creative, expressive. It is, and some of these words have a lot of judgment around them, so we can talk about that, but it is a more surrendered energy. It is a more collective and collaborative energy. It has an aspect of wild to it. Everything not being planned and rigid. And in that wildness, we can have creativity and we can have inspiration and we can break that mold that we've always done it this way and create something very new. It's also a receptive energy. It's a magnetic energy. And so these two energies play quite well together. And I thought about doing slides and I chose not to today because I really wanted to be with you. And I think coming out of the times that we've been in, it's more of the connection and less about the information, but I'm going to give you the information. But if I had a slide right now, I'd have the yin yang symbol on there. You guys familiar with that? Anybody not know what I'm talking about if I say the yin yang symbol? Okay. So that yin and yang symbol has a white side, which is actually the yang or masculine energy. And the side that is traditionally black is the yin or feminine energy. Now, most people see that, and even I had taught for years. And then I went, wait, there's those two circles in each side that actually have a critical importance. In the white side, there's a center of the black. So in the middle of the masculine energy, there is a circle of feminine energy. In the middle of the feminine energy, there is a circle of yang energy. And the potency, the grandest expression of each of those two energies depends on the relationship of the one in the center. So if we let's look at a little bit of stereotypical energy but just so that we can begin to recognize it. So the masculine energy that might walk through this room, there's a way that masculine energy in its presence commands attention. There's a way that it's like, who is that? What is that? And I'm drawn, like I can't almost stop when there's that presence of potent energy. Feminine energy is also going to walk through and there's a drawing to it, but it's a different kind of drawing. It's like, oh, I feel that and I'm drawn to it. Who is that? They both have a who is that quality to it, but there's a way that there's an erectness, a rigidity, a solidness that draws us to the masculine. And there's an openness, a quality of, oh, I can relax in that feminine space. Again, neither one is better than the other. And when we get into power, it is actually the relationship of the two that has the most impact. So now, and I'm going to use a romantic example for this one, but masculine energy, when I ask, if we're talking romance, if I ask a group of feminine beings, actually, let me back up. So what's cool about those two energies is that they are like magnets. And again, using a romantic metaphor, our attraction, again, doesn't matter who we're attracted to or what our orientation is, those two energies are like poles of a magnet. And when you bring masculine energy and feminine energy, or opposite ends of the magnets, what do? They come together, like they're drawn together. But if we flip one of those magnets, what happens? They repel. Like, how fast can I get away? We play with the magnets. So these energy dynamics are playing out in all of our relationships. And so we want to be able to recognize how our energy is showing up. And if we bring masculine to masculine, if both of those people are predominantly masculine, we're going to have one, by nature, authentically predominantly masculine, we're going to have one experience. If one is more like myself, trying to perform the masculine, as I discovered it back in my corporate days, that performance of the masculine is actually going to have a repelling quality as well. Things are not going to flow. And that was one of the things. I got called a bully by my boss. And I was like, what? What? I don't get it. But it was the performance of my strength rather than my actual strength. It was my way of thinking of how I had to take control of things rather than knowing that if I stood in my own energy, I had immense influence. And so going back to that romantic aspect that I was talking about, and it's just a great example that if I say to feminine beings who are attracted to masculine beings, if that present masculine being walks through the room or is standing in front of you, is he attractive? Most of those women will say, absolutely. And then I say, okay, that same masculine being opens his heart and stays in that presence. Is he attractive? Oh my God, yes. It's the integration of the two. On the flip side, there is a way that the masculine is drawn to the radiance, the magnetic radiance of the feminine. But if she loses her inner strength, if she collapses in the deepest emotionality of the feminine, she actually loses her attractiveness, I should say, her attractiveness. And so she's got to hold that center while she holds her light. The masculine opens its heart, the yin energy, while it holds that solid presence. So as you're listening, just begin to notice how these energies might play out with you. And they often play out differently if we go from the extremes of the boardroom professional space to romantic space to even physically intimate space. How we relate to those masculine and feminine energies within us may shift. And it's quite often, especially for predominantly masculine beings, that it may show up quite powerfully in their professional world. But moving into their romantic world, they may, because of societal conditioning and what's happened over the last 50 years is basically we've said, don't be feminine to the women, to the feminine beings. Don't be feminine. Embody this masculine energy. Keep, stiff upper lip. Don't show your emotions. Don't let them see you cry. Don't let them see any weakness. At the same time, we've conditioned the masculine to don't be that guy. Don't be, excuse my language, the asshole. Open up, create space. But because we haven't understood these two energies, we've actually started to abandon our greatest powers. And that's when I am walking the world to invite people to come back to what is my true energy and how do I get to live it in every part of my life to create an experience of success, joy, connection, love, and contribution. Like going back to every one of us are here for a reason and we have a unique expression. So how do I bring my authentic self to everything that I do? And in that authenticity is where we get our joy. I actually refer to it as ecstatic authenticity. Ecstatic authenticity being the place where we no longer have to twist ourselves into a pretzel, sell ourselves out, settle for anybody or anything. And we can finally really enjoy being who we are and have the courage in that to do what we're meant to do. And so when we're talking business, sometimes we are in our businesses from more of a place of fear. This is what or a place of I have to, rather than a place of I get to. And so part of this invitation is again to get to know you so that you can have that fulfillment that we talked about in those first questions. So there's a couple of different places I could go in this moment, but I think I want to give you a personalized inner invitation to get a little bit more personal with these two energies first. Like, how do they express in you? So that we can talk about, from a business perspective, from a life perspective, getting you some more insights into what might be really serving you and what might be really getting in the way, because you're trying to be the strong one, or you're trying to not be the one that's too strong or too powerful. So who'd like to know a little bit more of what their primary energy is? Yes? Is there interest in that? Okay, most of the heads. Okay, cool. So these questions are not business oriented. They are very much relationship oriented, but it's where we can get beyond all the conditioning and the expectations of what we're supposed to be. So I'm going to ask 4 questions. They're super simple. You can keep the answers in your head. And the thing that I'll say, though, as I ask you these questions is to answer from a place where you can't be judged. Everything goes well. It's idyllic. And you can't be rejected. There's no problems. Everything is ideal. And you're safe. You're completely safe. Okay. So with that, the 4 questions is, if you were to pick your ideal lover, are they physically larger than you or physically smaller than you? Again, just keep your answers. If you were to pick and I'm bringing a little bit of sexuality into our business conversation, but if you were to pick your ideal lover, are they physically stronger than you, i.e. they can move you across the bed? Or are they physically stronger and they move you across the bed? If you're in a dating situation, knowing it's always fun to reverse the energies. But in general, would you prefer to be the one to ask out, pick up, and take someone to dinner? Or would you prefer to be the one asked out, picked up, and taken to dinner? Most of the time. And then the last one is, if you were in a hot, steamy kiss up against a wall, more times than not, this is where the spicy comes in, more times than not, would you want to be the one against the wall being kissed or the one facing the wall giving the kiss? There's no right answers to any of this, but it's an invitation to start looking at, what's my primary energy? So if you prefer, everybody got their answers, or you'd need more time? Okay, so if you prefer a lover who is physically smaller than you prefer to be the stronger one, you prefer to ask out and pick up, and you prefer to face the wall and give the kiss, those are more masculine. That's going to indicate that there's a more predominance of masculine energy in you. If you prefer to have your partner be larger, your partner be stronger, your partner ask you out, and to be against the wall, those are indicators of feminine energy. And what has happened is, quite often those have gotten reversed. The number of men and women and couples that I work with who have those energies completely reversed right now is huge. Or maybe not completely, but frequently. I spoke to a gentleman last week who we were having this conversation about masculine and feminine energy, and he just facilitated a 3-day retreat for his team. And he went, oh my gosh, the amount of accommodating energy where I don't claim who I am and what I stand for. And this is why my team struggles. Because they're actually, and he gave 2 or 3 examples of where like people on his team were like asking for his leadership. And he'd gone so collaborative, so accommodating, so much bring your energy to this, that the team wasn't as cohesive as it could have been, because it needed some additional leadership. It needed some more direction. But then you could use the example of me that got called the bully, that was trying to prove that masculine energy. And my team also wasn't succeeding because I was over amping that masculine energy. Another thing that happens, and this was another part that this gentleman brought in last week, is he said, and I'm so exhausted after these events. Like I got nothing. Well, what's interesting is that if we reverse our energies, if we're using our secondary energy, so let's go back to the yin and yang so that this makes sense. The primary energy, the yin side or the yang side, and then the center energy is going to be your secondary or complementary energy. So what I discovered was while I was performing masculine, and I would have told you before I answered those 4 questions, I would have told you I was predominantly masculine. Absolutely, because it's how I showed up in the world and I didn't know myself any other way. And yet it explains so much. I'm like, why am I always so frustrated when it comes to relationships and men? And why am I exhausted? Because I had reversed my energies. And whether it's a predominant feminine being running more masculine energy or a predominant masculine being running more feminine energy, it always exhausts us to run that opposite energy as our primary energy. So some masculine beings will know if you have a really emotional conversation with anyone, but particularly a romantic partner, how often, and you don't have to raise your hands, but I'm going to ask it as a question, but how often do you want to go take a nap? Like, I'm exhausted. That's because those deep emotional conversations are actually drawing on that feminine energy. And so this gentleman last week, and it was just such a perfect example coming into this to have that conversation of like, okay, so if you weren't abandoning yourself so much with your team, you might actually have more success with the team and be less exhausted going home. That question about energy at the end of the day. Feminine beings, it is, while I am not a medical professional at all, but there are beginning to be studies of how much chronic fatigue and adrenal burnout and all of these other experiences physically of some level of exhaustion, because we are not used to running. Again, I'm going to say me as a feminine being and other feminine beings, not used to running that masculine energy at the level that we believe we have to in a corporate space, in a business space. And again, it doesn't matter if we're working for somebody else or working for ourselves. We can actually be successful in business by bringing in a lot more feminine energy. And that's where now let's move to, well, I'm going to give you 4 things with a 5th bonus that really impact how we have the most power, and I'm going to use a masculine word, potency, in our business environments and in our life. But the first one is authenticity, which is what we've been talking about here on one level of who am I as a masculine or feminine being, and giving myself permission to come back into that. So working with this gentleman to bring him back into more of that masculine energy, not to close his heart, not to stop caring, that's the center, but to be able to bring that rootedness, that direction that his team actually needs, and to still care. For the feminine beings to be able to go, I can actually let go more. Now, this is also something that the masculine can learn from their feminine, is you're on that path and there's somewhere to get to and there's a result or a goal to achieve. But when it's all on you and there's no yin energy, there's no feminine energy of surrender or allowing, the pressure to figure it out all on our own is huge. Nobody else can help me. I got it. But if we can bring in a little bit more of that yin energy and we can let go, knowing we're on the path to that goal, but we can let go, and whether we might call it the universe or life or miracles or synchronicities, that yin energy actually creates a space for us to see other possibilities. The masculine can get so focused and so linear that they lose sight that there are infinite ways that we can actually get to that goal. So no matter whether we're predominantly masculine or feminine, if we are on a goal and we stay so focused in that masculine energy, we can't see all the other possibilities, and we actually have to work a lot harder to get there. If we can open up to intuition, feminine energy, gut feeling, that's actually the feminine coming through the masculine. Oh, my gut's telling me. It doesn't make logical sense, but my gut's telling me, go this way. There can be an incredible amount of success and support and ease when we can listen to that. When we can actually allow a we is more feminine energy, me is more masculine energy. So if I got to do it all myself, it's all on my shoulders, we're sitting in masculine energy. Is there a space for feminine energy to come in? So authenticity is the first of the 5. Authenticity being, who am I, predominantly masculine and feminine? It is also that idea where I said, I know who I am, ecstatic authenticity. I know who I am. I know what I'm up to. I know what I value. I know what I need. I know what my boundaries are. When there's a lack of masculine energy, we don't have any boundaries. We actually say yes to way too many things. And then that actually breeds resentment. So if we don't have boundaries and you have resentment in your relationships or in your business, on any level, it's pointing to a lack of masculine energy. That ability to say no, to set boundaries, to go home at a good time, to not bring the work home, or to know there's a container for that, that's all about masculine energy. So the authenticity to be who you are, know what matters to you and live that, and then understand the dynamics of the masculine and the feminine so that you have the most agency, the most impact with the integration of those energies within yourself. So that's the authenticity piece. Very related to that is the attraction piece. So I said, attracting clients is as much about energy as attracting a romantic partner. So I was speaking about this years ago, and I went to a cocktail party afterwards, and somebody said, well, give me an example. I was like, okay, so here's the example that I used then, and I've used so many times since then, and this one, I'm going to use a wedding photographer. And so the wedding photographer meets with his potential clients, his or her potential clients. And the first one says, here's the things that we do. Here's the time that we're going to spend. Here's the number of pictures. Here's how you're going to get them. And I want to make sure that everything is covered and everybody gets in the pictures that are supposed to be. And I'm going to do everything I can to get that and make that happen for you. Or there's the wedding photographer that says, here's the set of things that you're going to get. But what really matters to me is that I capture those moments for you where you are looking at each other, where the family is connected. I want you to have the memories that take your breath away for the next 50 years. Which wedding photographer do you want to work with? Number 2. Because they were connected to their own energy. And I was moving back and forth in masculine and feminine energy, actually, as I was describing it. Both were there. I was committed from a masculine energy standpoint. I was right there, but I was also bringing my heart. So the marriage of those two things is incredibly compelling. And it takes us into the third part, is the passion, the aliveness, the passion for what we're doing. That second description was all about the passion that that photographer had for his work. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about financial planning, like, why are you passionate about it? Why does it matter to you? Why does it move you? Why does real estate move you? What is it that you want for your clients? And start speaking from that place that is sometimes more vulnerable, feminine energy. And we can respect vulnerability when it's held with presence. So you open your heart. This is why it matters. I suspect there's going to be a lot more people that are drawn to knowing why it matters to you, why you do what you do. So the passion. And then the energy. So the authenticity, the attraction, the passion, the energy. It takes way more energy to not be yourself. So energy actually ties to authenticity. Trying to perform, be the one that's liked, be the one that's successful, be the one that's got it all together. I don't care masculine or feminine. There's a level of anytime we're performing and trying to prove or pretend that we are something, it is exhausting. And we're not fulfilled. We don't come home. We don't end the day with enjoyment. We don't end the day energized. But if we're living as our truest self, it will fill us, not empty us. So the energy matters. And the energy of how you're showing up with your team or your clients matters. And then the last one, which is really the bonus, but not so much. It's really the foundation. And that's love. And love, the connection, the unity is really the feminine. Sovereignty is the masculine. Unity is the feminine. We need both. We need both. We can't lose ourselves. We can't not have boundaries and actually have teams or partnerships. In a romantic world, if we don't have boundaries, we call it enmeshment or codependence. So we need two sovereign beings in order to have a partnership. But then once we have that partnership and both beings are there and being authentic, now we can have what we would call unity. And so from this path of love, authenticity, ecstatic intimacy. We might not use intimacy in a business concept very often, but really knowing each other is intimacy. Seeing each other is intimacy. Being who we are creates intimacy. So it's not, that word has been, captured too much by the romantic space. It's actually part of real relationships. And I underscore that word. Relationships matter. And the vulnerability, the realness, the authenticity creates solid relationships. And if we put authenticity and intimacy together, we get ecstasy. And ecstasy, again, that word's been corrupted by sexuality, but ecstasy is that joy, that passion, that aliveness, that awe. Life takes your breath away. Over and over and over again. When we have the capacity to be who we are and to relate fully, we can have a life that takes our breath away. Not just once, not just twice, but over and over and over again. I didn't know it could be this way. And that's what I want for you. And love is the piece that starts with love of self, which creates the possibility for authenticity. It's love of those that we work with. It's not romantic love, but it's the honoring and the respect and the seeing of the enoughness in all of those that we interact with. Our clients, our teammates, our bosses, those that work for us. That ability to have an open heart and have that love. And then when we operate from that space, we actually begin to get inclusivity. We get to have the place where everyone is welcome. We get to have the place where we can actually see and honor and respect and value every single person. And that's the power of love. The Dalai Lama said, it might be the Western woman who actually, I don't remember if he said heals, but saves our world. And I might argue that maybe it's not the Western woman, but it's actually the feminine energy within all of us that brings us back to connection rather than separation, rather than I'm better, you're better, we're different. How do we be a whole? in our families, our relationships, our businesses, our world. So be you, discover these energies within you, and support yourself with them, and support those that you interact with them, so that we can all have more happiness, joy, fulfillment, and success. What questions do you have? Comments, questions?
This is really powerful. Thank you for your energy. Yeah, that's. You had me. That really makes sense in that stage. I didn't have a question. I was just making a comment that. Sorry, how does this work? Are you guys messing with? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Just a comment. Yeah, it's interesting to find, where I am in that. And I've always been obviously in a masculine sense, but I do relate to the feminine side. And so it's good to have that understanding. It wasn't really a question, just I was making a comment.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
What if you work with somebody
We'll bring it back here, Kyle.
that does have that super masculine that won't open up to that feminine side?
Yeah.
How do you work with somebody like that?
Yeah. One is you don't go against them. So let's look at the polarity. Like if that person, whether predominantly authentically masculine or it's more of the performance, which mine was, either way, if we bring masculine to masculine, we're going to have that tension. So actually opening will create a different experience. So more of that openness of the feminine. You can have a massive impact when you don't actually argue with somebody. Like they're standing there trying to make their point and that this is the way. And I'm just, okay, I'm going to be with you. And then all of a sudden it's like they soften and, let's have a different conversation. So that's a very simplified answer to a big conversation. But in general, we're creating polarity and not going against. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, it does, as I speak into this microphone. And I would just say one other thing too. When I'm in the get her done mode, which you have to be running a chamber of commerce, it is exhausting.
But what if you didn't? You just said there's one of the beliefs which you have to be running a chamber of commerce. What if that wasn't true? And what if you holding it? Can I challenge you just a little bit? What if you holding it is actually perpetuating this problem with all of the women who look up to you, all of the feminine beings that look up to you in the space? And so I'm not saying that there isn't some masculine energy, but we get so caught in this is the way it has to be. You've actually said exactly what I want people to hear in this, is that the way we thought it was or had to be isn't fully true. And what does it cost you when you spend all that time in that get her done place?
I'm challenged.
Well, and notice your language. Is challenge masculine or feminine?
Masculine.
So what if there's an invitation to explore something different? And I'm really going to thank you because we just really played there. And that takes courage and vulnerability. And you allowed that. So thank you.
Anytime.
I think Carl wanted it.
Oh,
There you go, Carl.
I think the reason why I signed up for this is because in my business, real estate purchases residentially at least are very emotional decisions. And I'm really good on the negotiating nuts and bolts. I'll get you to the end at this price kind of thing. And one thing I kind of put in the back seat sometimes is the connection that you describe, where, I mean, calling it feminine is unfair, I guess, to a certain extent, but there's a deeper attachment to my clientele. And it's there, and it's not that it doesn't exist. Is sometimes I just kind of forget because a lot of people are very bottom line oriented.
Yeah.
So this was extremely helpful.
Awesome. And sometimes working with couples, you'll actually find one that's more bottom line oriented and one that's more emotional and how it feels, and also being able to understand that dynamic.
And it's not always who you think it is.
And it's not absolutely, that's where I said it's actually reversed for a lot of relationships. And one of the things is, if we were talking romance, is to actually shift the connections in our relationship, in our romantic life, by both people finding their authenticity again, because quite often it's flipped. Anybody else? Yeah.
This is a little bit out of the box. I know that you have to use certain words to get interest and people to come listen to you. So have you ever thought about the difference between the, masculine versus feminine? I mean, it's easy for us to understand it. So have you thought about other words besides that?
Yeah, well, and yes, and some people take those words don't always land with everybody. And here's how I explain it. If we go back to yin and yang, and it's why I use the yin and the yang symbol, that energetic aspect has been here for eons. And they pointed to it back then because they understood the masculine and the feminine energies in the universe collectively. If we just look at how flowers pollinate, there is an incredible masculine and feminine energy just in pollination. If we look at the difference in the energy between the sun and the moon, there is an energetic difference in the ways that those two aspects of our world play out. The seasons have a masculine and feminine energy to them, with how much, like the summer, we're coming into peak masculine energy as we come into summer solstice. Winter solstice is peak feminine energy. Nourish, nurture, be in the embrace of the winter time. So the energies of, whether we call them yin and yang or masculine and feminine or purple and yellow, the energies exist and always have. And so our language requires us to name them something. And so it's really the, for lack of a better word, categorization of these expressions in the world. And if I could come up with new words, and it would actually make sense just to take that out. But the key is it's not gender. Like, one thing I will stand for is, many people used to say it's male and it's female. No, doesn't matter from a gender standpoint. The energies within are what are playing out, and what energy are we in at any given moment. So I love the question, and thank you for the challenge. Absolutely, absolutely. If you guys would, and I'll take more questions, but if you guys would like more time, I do, we can just have an individual session, and that you can do that at meetwithjoanna.com. And if you use the code Cherry Creek with capital C and capital C, lowercase everything else, it's $97. So meet with Joanna and the promo code Cherry Creek. If you guys want to spend some more time, spend an hour just talking about what's happening for you and what might be supportive in your world, both personally and professionally. Absolutely. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. I remember my first time hearing that talk about the masculine and the feminine, and being up against the car or being the one, giving the kiss. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have the power to be feminine and have strength, not just think about myself as a man and not being at all feminine at all. And made a profound difference in my life. And so I want to say thank you for that. Thank you for coming, being our speaker here today, sharing your gift with us. Thanks for joining us at Cherry Creek Chamber of Commerce, and hope to see you next month at a business success series where we have Seema Bhatt, a sales leader and business sales professional and business leadership coach. See you next month.
Thank you.
That's the first time you have spoken in person since COVID.